All right, then. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? My name is Neil Van Leeuwen, and I'm here with my co-host, Tanya Lombroso, and this is the What is Belief seminar series. We are having our fourth talk in this series so far. So welcome everyone who was here before, and also welcome to the newcomers. We are very pleased to have Giuliana Mazzoni here with us today. She is now at the University of Rome, Sapienza, and she has done fascinating work on many different areas of the awareness of time, things like autobiographical memory, and also very famously, she has worked on issues with false memory and eyewitness testimony. And we're having her here today to talk about the relationship between memory and belief and what happens when sometimes we don't believe the very things that we seem to remember. So thank you for joining us, Giuliana. The talk will run for about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll have a chance for Q&A, which Tanya will manage afterwards. And if I didn't say so, this series is generously funded by the John Templeton Foundation. So thank you to them. And thank you, Giuliana. Please go ahead and take it away.
Well, thanks to you both, Tanya and Neil, for inviting me to give a talk at this seminar series. I've been listening not to all the other talks, but I took advantage of the fact that they are recorded. So I think that this is a great feature actually of the series. And I have a few warnings. The first one is that I need actually to share my screen now. And I hope that everybody will be able to see it if I find my screen now. The thing that I wanted to share, just a second, because I was able to share it before and now actually it has vanished. So let me try to see what I can do. So I tried again. Okay, here it is. Excellent. And I hope that you all see it now.
It looks good.
Yeah,
looks perfect.
I have two warnings for starting. The first one is that I moved back to Italy in 2019, and right now I've been giving many talks in Italy, and so Italian has become the language I dream in, and English actually has been fading away slowly, which means that I might actually, stumble on my tongue, and I might have hesitations right now about finding the right terminology and the right word, but I hope that you will forgive me. The second one is that you all know I'm not a philosopher. So my experience in meetings with philosophers is that at times we use the same terminology to mean completely different things. And so there is a sort of misunderstanding, we talk at different levels and we think that we should understand each other. And then I'm convinced of what I'm saying, but then I'm saying something that the other people do not understand because it does not belong to their way of thinking. So this might happen too. And I think that there will be time in the discussion afterwards to, in the time for questions actually to try to address some of these problems if these problems arise. I want to start by saying that actually overall there is a sort of general stance which belongs to both lay people and also researchers that memory has a primacy overall. In the sense that it is one of the most important or maybe the most important cognitive function because it's a function that provides a lot of information about the individual, okay? So if I ask you what makes you you, then I think that many people reply that it is my memory. So the memory that I have for my past, the memory that I have for my personal experiences. And when they talk about memory, they talk about the possibility of retrieving something in their mind that pertains to their own experiences. And I want to make this point by saying that actually in both neuropsychology and cognitive psychology, there's loads of evidence that actually memory matters a lot, okay? So here I just report one of the many studies on brain damage cases in which it has been shown that the loss of autobiographical memories implies a loss of sense of self. So it implies a loss of identity. There is also a very nice story by Oliver Sacks, who talks about Jimmy G, this lost sailor who, after a brain injury, actually lost, suffered of a very severe retrograde amnesia, and he lost a lot of his early memories. And actually this impaired his life for the rest of his years, and he lived in foster care. I mean, you know, he needed to be cared for because he couldn't negotiate life enough. There is a lot of evidence also in studies from autobiographical memory that provide evidence that actually people feel that they are what they remember. And there is also sort of objective evidence that actually we are what we remember. We talk about ourselves in terms of our past experiences, and the ones that we are able to access make our history and our identity. There is some fascinating actually work on what are now called dissociative identity disorders that were once called multiple personality disorders. And what this pathological condition is characterized by is the lack of connection in a person's sense of identity. That's why they have changed the title from multiple personality into dissociative identity disorders, because these are characterized by separate identities, each of which has, as written here, I've taken it from the DSM definition, has its own pattern of perceiving, relating to, and thinking about the self. So again, identity. And what characterizes the possibility of distinguishes these various identities is the fact that there is amnesia for other identities. So if I'm now in identity 1, then I have forgotten what happened to me during my life as identity, or my periods of life as identity 2, 3, 4, etc., etc. This actually idea that it is possible through memory to have an identity, and also by losing memory to change identity, dates back in the old age. It dates back, for example, to James, who claimed that by erasing memory, a person becomes a different person. But it also dates, and there is actually a very nice debate on psychological continuity theory. So to what extent a person that has completely lost all his memories, for example, suffers from a very, very severe advanced stage of Alzheimer, is the same person or a different person, because there is no possibility to access those memories. And I don't have time really to go into this debate right now, but I want to make the claim that actually all this dates back a little bit further before to some ideas that, for example, were presented by Locke in the essay concerning human understanding, in which, and these are not Locke's words, okay, but I've taken this from this other paper. I am the same person as someone who existed in the past, if and only if I can extend my current consciousness back to that person's actions. So again, the possibility of going back in time and having access to my own actions in the past. And this is the first important thing. The second important thing that makes memory a very fundamental element in our being is the fact that we all have the stance that actually if we remember, then it must have happened. Then it must have been true. Okay, so memories refer to real experiences, and this also dates back to Aristotle in the Reminiscence, when he was making a claim, if I'm not misunderstanding, that memory is like a seal. After all, we have been talking about memory traces for forever. Okay, like a seal that experience leaves in the person's mind, in the individual's mind, and so I don't know if he talks about foreverness of this print, that this seal that is left in our mind, but certainly the seal refers to an experience, and so the experience must have been there in order for a memory to exist and in order for us to access memories. And this, as I said, is our basic naive approach. I remember, so I access a mental representation of a real element, and this is a sort of assumption that we all have that actually helps us survive in this world. So for example, if I say I remember having breakfast, it means that I really had breakfast this morning. I hope that you had breakfast, even if it is relatively early in the day for you. I mean, I had breakfast a few hours ago. So there are many metaphors that are used by people. Memory as a print left by experience, as I mentioned before, or memory as a video camera. This is very, very common. So people replay memories in their mind. That's what they do. And this is the way they talk about that. But I also want to report a metaphor that I encountered by chance when I worked on a case, on a court case of a woman who was 25. And then she was able to remember almost every day of her life between age 9 and 14. And for years, she had forgotten that period, but then she worked on trying to remember, and then she produced something like 5,000 pages, a sort of James stream of consciousness type of production, in which she was able to remember every minute detail of the days of those 5 years, okay? And this happened like 9 years afterwards. So she was able, and these are just excerpts that I've taken, but these 5,000 pages are full of this. She keeps saying, I remember it very, very well. And in this case, what she remembers very, very well is that this person read Matthew 13 from the gospel, and she can remember both the name of the passage and the number of the line he read for me. And that at a certain point, he told me, she who has ears should try to understand. And then he told me, but do you have ears? I checked and answered, yes, I do have ears, and so on and so on and so forth for 5,000 pages, okay? So she can remember what she was wearing, what her mother told her, how scared she was taking the bicycle out, and everything, basically everything. And when I asked her, how is it possible that you can remember in such minute details every single day of your life in those years, she came up with a freezer metaphor. So what she claims is that her memory is like a freezer. So an experience comes in, gets frozen, and then, she lost actually the access to the freezer. But then when she accessed the freezer again and she opened the freezer, she was able to thaw those memories. And those memories came out as genuine, fresh experiences, as if they were never touched. So it did not undergo any effect of, of time, no forgetting, no interference, no nothing, fresh as new. But this stance that this opinion that she has, this metaphor that she uses, actually is not that uncommon, to the point that when I give talks about the real nature of memory to lawyers or to judges, etc., they all come to me and say, so we cannot rely on our memory. How is it possible? If I remember something, it must have happened. So if a witness remembers something, it must have happened. Okay. So just to say that this is not that uncommon. It's not just layperson, but also educated people share this type of stance. The point that I want to make is that for many, many years, actually, this type of stance was shared also by memory researchers. So when they were providing material to study, were providing participants materials to study, and participants were saying, I remember. So this I remember was taken as I report what I saw. And the experimenter was taking it as, I know what you saw, and so I can measure accuracy, but I take your assertion, I remember, as a sort of evidence of you being able to connect to something that happened to you in the past. Fortunately, in many years ago, still 1970s, more or less, it has been the stress has been put off something that is more of a subjective evaluation of the memory content. So I report what for me feels to be a good enough memory of what was presented. And so what has been introduced is this sense of this set of metacognitive processes, metacognitive evaluation or appraisal of the content, and this sense of a subjective evaluation of what the person is able to access in her mind. This has been tapped in many studies with the idea of measuring confidence. So confidence refers to what is the quality of my memory for the type of material that is being presented to me. And as you know, confidence is based on a number of variables, some of which are the details of the memory, quality of the memory, others are the ease of access of the memory, and so on and so forth. And the assumption here too is that high quality means high confidence, and high confidence predicts accuracy. I don't know if you see the whole thing, predicts accuracy. And this is an example of some underconfidence, but still, these people are relatively accurate in predicting, knowing how good their memory is, and the better the higher their confidence, the higher their accuracy, their correct memories. In naive theories, of course, memory confidence tracks memory accuracy, but this is true also for a number of scholars. And there's been a very intense debate in eyewitness testimony, for example, on whether really accuracy and confidence are so strongly related to each other. And for years, it's been said that no, they are not so strongly related with each other. Then some methodological changes have been made that have actually restored confidence in our confidence ratings, but it is not necessarily true that actually confidence reflects accuracy. So, for example, here you can see that for it's rather vague and fuzzy, but for studied items there is a relationship between confidence and accuracy. But for lures that are strongly related to the items that are presented, or even weakly related to the items that are presented, this relationship just breaks down. So it is a sort of case in which a sort of example in which when it is must needed, so under some circumstances that require actually a good relationship between confidence and accuracy, because confidence is what is used for making, for example, decisions by judges, etc., etc. This relationship breaks down. But I want to say that actually confidence does not cover the whole spectrum of what gives us a sense of veridicality. And one of the elements that actually gives us the idea that what we remember really happened is what are been called recollective judgments. In the sense they answer the question, does my memory reflect a real experience? And it is again a sort of evaluation process, an appraisal process of the characteristics of the mental content. So, and if in this case, if there is a strong sense of recollection, which means the memory is very vivid, that it's possible to re-experience the original experience, it's possible to travel back in time to relive the same emotion, etc., then it happened. Okay, so if a recollection, if a memory has a very strong sense of recollection, then the conclusion that people draw is that it happened. What I call belief in occurrence, in the title, when belief and memory compete. So what I call belief in occurrence is this assignment of subjective veridicality value to a mental content. So we're able to retrieve a mental content, and then we evaluate it and assign a veridicality value to it. Why do I call it belief? I call it belief because actually I agree with these statements. A belief is the mental acceptance or conviction in the truth or actuality of some idea. And so there is this component in belief in occurrence, because I believe in the truth of this, in the original truth of this mental experience that I have. Involves a list of properties, not just the representational content, but also it assumes veracity. It typically describes enduring and questioned ontological representations of the world, well, blah, 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 blah. But the fact is that all these are accepted as veridical. Okay, so the last three words are really the crucial words in all this long phrase that I wrote here. And it is not knowledge because actually, beliefs are held with conviction as regarded as true and involve a large self-referential element, which I think is actually what happens when we evaluate the veridicality of our memories. So what is it due to? Is it the result of metacognitive appraisals of a series of metacognitive processes, or is it something else? To what extent there is also, plays a role also some additional information that is evaluated. So it is also the result of some inferential decisional processes that occur afterwards. And to what extent there is a validation, so a sort of need for corroboration for this mental content before I have this sense of veridicality of my mental content, and hence I call it a memory. The point is that this recollection judgment that is often used to provide this sense of my memory refers to a true experience, actually is not necessarily yielding to the correct results. And the example of false memories, I think, is extremely important in making this point. So you all know the DRM paradigm. The DRM paradigm, people remember words that were not presented, but they were strongly or typically strongly associated with all the other words that were presented. But the point that I want to make is that it's possible to make very strong recollective judgments also about non-presented words. So the recollective judgment gives a sense of veridicality, but the sense of veridicality does not have to be correct, okay? The same thing happens, this is an old study of mine, when, for example, false autobiographical memories are created, not just false memories for words, are created by asking people to imagine an experience that they did not have as such. And people are able to actually remember things, or they claim to remember things that in this case probably happened to them because this is a control condition, but in this case certainly did not happen to them. And they have a very strong sense of recollection to the point that they're able to describe the experience in relatively minute details, like the case that I talked about. I remember going upstairs and the nurse was there. She had blonde hair and she wore glasses, and I still can experience my sense of fear for this medical procedure that actually never happened as such. So is there really a reality validation? So I question this, because I think that there is no reality validation, and then this is basically mostly a subjective judgment. And what creates a situation in which a false memory with high recollective quality becomes actually a true memory for the person. So is it a mistake? Is it mistaking a subjective evaluation of memory quality for objective evidence of occurrence? And this, I have 2 question marks because I leave this as a question mark. I want to present here now a very old model that I created, and you can see from the arrows and the boxes that it is very old, that I created trying to portray a sort of set of processes that take place when I'm asked, did this event happen to you? So did you have breakfast this morning, for example, okay? And I distinguish these two components, memory, which then leads to this recollective judgment, and then the belief. And if I ask you, did you have breakfast this morning? Basically, people search in their memory. If they find a memory for the event, they probably say, yes, I had breakfast this morning. But I think that there is another step that needs to be taken. So is this memory for having breakfast a good enough memory? So this is this judgment that I talked about, a good enough memory. So is this memory diagnostic that the event happened? And then if it is diagnostic, yes, the event happened. If it is not diagnostic, then one concludes that the event did not happen. So I did not have breakfast. Of course, I put this as a dichotomous decision, but actually it could be on a line, on a continuous line. More interesting, in my opinion, is when people have no recollection. So people search for a memory for breakfast this morning and they don't find any memory. Do they say immediately, no, I did not have breakfast? I don't think so. I think that, again, there is this judgment of diagnosticity of the relevance of lack of recollection. And so if lack of recollection is diagnostic of lack of experience, I mean, of the fact that the event did not happen, then people say they did not have breakfast. But if, and which case is this? For example, if you don't remember having breakfast this morning, you assume that breakfast, that this morning is recent enough for you. And so the memory should be very clear and very vivid. Or, for example, if I don't remember being invited to Buckingham Palace and see the Queen of England, then I assume that it would have been an incredibly memorable event, and therefore I think that my lack of memory means that the event did not happen. But then there are other cases in which memories are much more vague. Or, for example, I ask you about past memories, really when you were very young and in early ages, and you don't remember. So, for example, if I ask you, did you have breakfast when you were 3 years old on, I don't know, November the 15th? Well, you don't remember, but you don't say, no, I did not have breakfast. You say, well, let me look for some more evidence. And I might say that there is not enough evidence. And so I cannot say anything, basically, or I find additional evidence that allows me to say that, yes, I had breakfast because my mother swears that I had breakfast right on that day. If there is not sufficient evidence, then I conclude that, no, I did not have breakfast on that day when I was 3 years old. So, and again, here there are all the, the gradation in between the no and the yes decision. So I think that it's possible to distinguish these two levels, okay? And what memory refers to is just the first part. And the belief is the result of the second part, the series of evaluations that people make. There is more evidence that I want to present of the independence between memory and, again, recollection, I call it here, and belief in occurrence. And the fact that, for example, in a number of studies, we have been able to manipulate very easily the belief. People came believing that actually a certain specific event, like choking on a small object, did not happen to them when they were very young. And after the manipulation, we just mentioned things to them. They actually came up, and this is the blue bar, they came up with the belief that actually probably that event happened to them, or certainly that event happened to them. But corresponding to this, actually, there was no increase in memory. So we were able to change the belief, but we were not able to change the memory. And this is one of the criticisms that have been made to the memory implantation part, claiming that actually was changed was just the belief and not the memory. There were no false memories implanted most of the times in those studies. This is another study in which we provide additional evidence of the independence or partial independence of these two constructs, recollection and belief in occurrence. And here you can see that actually there is a relationship between belief in occurrence and recollection, but only in some cases. In other cases, the relationship is negative. So it is possible to really disentangle these two concepts. And equally interesting is the fact that there are some variables that explain only belief. For example, the plausibility of an event that I remember explains only the belief that event happened, whereas all the characteristics that pertain to this recollective experience actually explain the recollection component and not the belief. There is also additional evidence on the independence of belief and occurrence, belief in occurrence from the memory component. And here I just put the photo of a collaborator of mine, whom I miss incredibly, who passed away a couple of years ago, and I really don't know how I can do without him. And we did a large number of these studies together. And the additional evidence pertains to the fact that if you ask people about their past experiences, a lot of these past experiences are memories that are believed in, and it is this sort of 55%, something like that, 50%. And there are a large component in autobiographical memory that are just facts. Knowledge, I know that, or I believe that certain things happened to me. And so there is no memory attached to them. More interesting is the fact that there is a small percentage, but a reliable and consistent percentage of memories that are not believed in. And at first we thought that this was just a fluke, just a random error. But then we decided to study these, if these type of memories existed. And indeed, for example, there is the anecdote of Jean Piaget, who was able to remember very vividly for his entire life being abducted in a park with his nanny. And only when he was in his 40s, his nanny, very old at the time, confessed that actually she made up the story because she wanted to spend time with her boyfriends. And of course, Piaget stopped believing in the memory, but the memory was still there and was with him, according to the anecdote, his entire life. The same thing, for example, there is another anecdote by Oliver Sacks about the Blitz in London that he remembered very, very well, but actually he was not in London during the Blitz. And another anecdote that was reported to me by a colleague of mine. She is Jewish and she has very, very vivid memories of being in a concentration camp. The problem is that she's too young for having been in a concentration camp. And yet the memories, so she knows that the memories are false. So she no longer believes in the memories, but the memories are still there. And so we decided to study this in a larger population. This is just the first of a number of studies that we've done on this. And consistently, we have found that of our samples, relatively large samples, as you can see, approximately 25% of the people have one non-believed memory, so a false memory that they know that is false. But the most important thing is that these false memories that people no longer believe in actually feel so very much like true memories. And so for these, the recollective quality is extremely high. The visual characteristics are there, the tactile characteristics are there, the same extent as believed memories, the clarity of the objects, of the location, of the people, the intensity of the feeling, the emotional contents, etc., etc. So all these elements are there for memories that are no longer believed in. So it's possible really to dissociate between the memory and then the belief in the occurrence of the experience that we had. Here, just the reason for withdrawing the belief from the memory. The most important one is social influence. My mother told me that it never happened. My cousin told him that actually he broke his leg and not me, and so on and so forth. Event implausibility. There are a number of rather bizarre false memories that people report, non-believed memories, in which people are chased by dinosaurs, or they fly unaided, or do things that really are not possible, physically possible at times. Contradictory evidence that is not of social origin, for example, lack of evidence, lack of medical records about an illness that I remember very well having when I was a kid, or pure lack of evidence. So these are two of the main reasons: lack of correspondence and active disconfirmation. And people take that to drop the belief, but basically nothing happens to the quality of the memory. So the question is, have memories that have been disconfirmed, basically, lost their sense of veridicality? Yes, to a certain extent they have. And it really depends on the initial quality of the memories. So these are memories that have initially had very, very strong recollective quality, but then the evidence that has been provided has been very compelling, and so the belief was dropped completely. These are memories that initially had a much less much lower recollective quality, and the evidence provided was sufficient, though, to really drop the belief. These are other examples, and I take this one, in which the recollective quality is very high and the evidence provided is not strong enough, but still it is not strong enough to just drop the belief. But actually the belief is, we call these seed of doubt. So the belief starts being shaky. Is it a real event or it's not a real event? Okay, so there are different degrees that depend on the initial recollection level and the type of information, the type of evidence that is provided that makes people drop and withdraw the belief. Another piece of information that I want to give you is that it's possible to easily manipulate the belief in occurrence. So it is possible to do it in the lab quite easily. It is possible to create false beliefs, so that make people believe that that they had experiences that actually they did not have. And a lot of studies on false memories are actually about that, as I said before. But it's also possible to take the belief away. Okay, and this is possible to take the belief. It is possible to take the belief away from false memories that are created in the lab, but it's also possible to take the belief away from true experiences that people had. And it is not that difficult. It doesn't take ages. It doesn't take hours. It takes just a small, clever manipulation. So some visual evidence or some convincing verbal evidence. At this point, I want to ask, so is this belief in occurrence just an irrelevant byproduct because it comes and goes, you know? It exists and then it's taken out, and then it resurrects again, and so on and so forth. So it's really malleable. Well, in my opinion, it is not just an irrelevant thing. It is not an irrelevant thing because, again, using words that are not mine, but that I share, beliefs are significant. Beliefs are held to be true. They provide the basis to understand the world and act within it. They provide the mental scaffolding for appraising, explaining, constructing a shared meaning of the world, and they allow us to interpret our ongoing experience and to place it within past and future. And so I think that actually this belief in occurrence is not just an irrelevant element, but it is what provides us with the sense of veridicality, which is absolutely necessary for us to negotiate life successfully, because it provides us with a sense of stability and continuity. Okay. So I come now to the question that gave the title of to my talk. So which wins when memory and belief compete? Usually we think that memory wins. A good memory is really, really what is needed. Well, in this case, for example, people claim that I don't know if you've seen the movie Timbuktu, a very old movie, but a beautiful movie. If you haven't seen it, I suggest watching it, about ISIL in Mali. So I remember seeing the movie Timbuktu. So if I have to choose between Timbuktu and another interesting movie, I choose to go see the other interesting movie. I remember being wronged by a colleague. And so since I remember being wronged by a colleague, I will behave less friendly towards that colleague. So memory determines behavior. But, you know, my point is maybe it's not memory, maybe it is just a belief. It is the belief because I think that those sentences, those statements need to be rephrased in terms, I believe my memory for seeing the movie Timbuktu as a veridical thing. So that refers to a real experience. Hence, I will choose to see another interesting movie instead of going again to see Timbuktu. And the same thing is for, I will behave less friendly towards a colleague if I believe that actually that memory is veridical. So I think that recollection and familiarity with the two components, the two main components of memory, they just feed into this belief decision of veridicality of the experience that is portrayed in the memory, and that has an effect on behavior. And the crucial test is what happens in non-believed memories. You know, when we have memories that are not believed in, which wins, the memory or the belief? And so we implanted true false memories, for example, for actions in the lab, and then by using a video, and then by using the same, and then we asked people pick actions still to be performed, and then we provided information of the actions that were not performed. Some cases there were the false actions that were not performed. In some cases there were true actions that actually people had performed. In order to convince people that the true actions were not performed, we provided a doctored video that actually was played, and those actions that we wanted to manipulate, for which we wanted to manipulate the belief, were omitted from the video. And so if they have to choose which actions to perform that were not performed before, of course, they have no memory. If they have no memory and no belief for the action, they choose to perform those actions. If they have a memory and the belief that they have performed those actions, of course, they don't choose those actions. So the crucial question is, when memory is still there and belief is no longer there, how do they behave? Do they choose those actions or they don't choose those actions? And the point is that they choose those actions. So they discount the memory, even if it is a very vivid memory for that action. I don't have time here to portray the quality of these memories, but it is like the one that I have shown you, okay? So they remember the action, they remember doing it, etc., but they no longer believe in it. And so they choose to repeat those actions, basically. And this is true both when the initial actions were false and when the initial actions were true. So people remember very well, I don't know, for example, touching their nose, but then if it is not shown, they no longer believe that they performed that action, and then the memory for that action, which is still vivid, is discounted. This is a study, which is not one of my studies, in which actually also the liking of our choices to a certain extent depends on believing in the reality of our experiences. And also this is another very small study in which we use this three cups game trick, and then we ask them to choose under different various conditions, to choose the original cup that had the ball underneath. And as you can see here, these are conditions in which the memory is absent or present, but the belief is still there. And in all cases, they choose the original cup, okay? But when the belief is no longer there, then the choice is completely different. So really the choice does not depend on the memory for the experience, but it depends on the belief on the veridicality of the experience. So I'm writing something that has taken too much time, but I can tell you that adjusting to the move to Roma La Sapienza has been quite a struggle for me. So it is still a work in progress, in which I claim that, well, I cannot claim that memory does not matter, because it's not true, but I claim that memory matters much less than we think. And what really matters is what we believe about our mental contents. And memory is just one of the components that feeds into the belief, okay? So one component is this recollection / familiarity, because we cannot forget familiarity, but then there are all these other components, which is I call it in quotes, information that we have about that experience. So the possibility, the physical possibility for the event, the personal possibility for the event, the social feedback that we receive about that, knowledge about the self and whether it fits or it doesn't fit within my history, and so on and so forth. And that feeds the belief in occurrence. And the belief is what decides the behavior. Here I just have split up the memory component of it, just to show that actually the belief is not the monitoring, is not the source monitoring, is not the reality monitoring. It is the final decision, something that clicks and people say, yes, okay, I believe in what I'm saying. I report it because for me it is true. So what is this belief in occurrence? I think that we need to speculate a little bit about that. Is it the result of metacognitive appraisal? Is it a deliberate, continuous, ongoing evaluation of the characteristic of each mental content that comes to mind? This is a possibility. Or maybe it's just a rule of thumb, a sort of assumption that we all hold, that the mental contents that have this type of characteristics by default are true. And then you know, this evaluation, this more thorough evaluation actually occurs only when that assumption is challenged. So only when there is disconfirming information of one type or another. And then people then have to stop there and say, well, you know, this is actually questioning my assumption about my mental world. So, and my experiences. So I need to think about it. I need to get some more information about it. But my propensity is that the system works in this second way. We assume truth, and then this truth assumption is fortunately usually correct. And so we are able to live our lives with great success in general. But there are situations in which it just breaks down. It's wrong. You know, we cannot assume that. And in that case, we need to stop and really reevaluate our contents. To a certain extent, there was the old Spinozan hypothesis, language Spinozan hypothesis, in which a statement is considered to be true unless questioned. And I think that I'm standing a little bit on that side of the fence. And thank you very much for this. And I think that now I can take questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Here you have to use imagination on Zoom that all of the clapping happening virtually is is audible.
Yeah, I'm very good at imagining things. Yes.
Excellent.
Especially in the pandemic, I live here alone, so I imagine a lot.
It's a good skill. So I'm going to invite people to
stop sharing, I think.
Maybe if you go ahead and stop sharing, that way you can see people.
Yeah. Okay.
And I will invite people to either type in their questions into the chat, or if you'd like me to call on you to unmute yourself and ask your question, you can do that.
Okay. It's okay. Either thing. I hope that I'm able to understand everybody. So let's hope.
I'll be monitoring the chat as well, so that you don't have to do that.
Okay.
And since no one's written anything yet, I'm going to take the advantage of sharing to ask a question myself. I'm really fascinated by these cases where you have a competition between the sort of vividness of the memory itself and then these other kinds of reasons to doubt its verticality, like plausibility or the testimony of another person. And the way I'm inclined to make sense of that, which I think is consistent with what you might have said a couple slides ago, is that people might have something like an intuitive theory of how memory works. And that intuitive theory says something like we can have false memories, but to the extent that a memory is more vivid and more realistic, it's more likely to be true, and so on. So I'm curious if you thinking about people having something like an intuitive theory of memory and its reliability is useful. And I'm also curious how you might make sense of your data with other phenomena that you are extremely familiar with, which is the fact that we're so inclined, it seems by default, to take other people's eyewitness testimony so seriously, right? So on the one hand, you have these data where when memory and belief compete, it looks like people are quite willing to say, oh, my memory must be wrong. And yet on the other hand, it seems like in lots of cases like eyewitness testimony, I think the kind of default lay attitude is that that's an extremely reliable source of information. So I'm just hoping you can speak to some of those thoughts.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I think that I will address the second one first, because I remember it better, and then you will remind me what the first one was. And I think that what happens, for example, in a witness testimony is what happens in general in social life. So what I believe is that we are social beings, and for being social beings, we must trust what other people say. And this is a sort of basic attitude that we have towards other people. I usually say that we don't trust certain categories of people, politicians, some types of lawyers, and used car salespeople. Okay, so people who you know, and your attitude towards them is that you know that they might trick you and they do not necessarily tell the truth. But in general, if my cousin tells me that she went to have a tea with a friend, I have no reason to doubt it, unless I have some reasons to doubt it. But then, you know, these are sort of exceptional cases. And on a day-to-day basis and minute-by-minute basis, my interaction with other people is based on reciprocal trust. And that's why, for example, in a witness testimony, really, you know, evidence provided by a witness is the prime source of decisions. There have been a number of studies that have shown that the prime source for decisions, for not just for juries, and you know, one thinks juries after all are lay people who are in that position for that moment, but also in the Roman legal systems that are present in Germany or in Italy, for example, and the decision is made by judges, and these are people who are very well prepared for this type of task. But still, you know, if a person says that she is very certain about what she is reporting, then tendentially you trust that person. And I think that actually this explanation applies also to your first question. If my memory competes with my mother's memory about who has fallen off a tree and broken her leg, if me or my cousin, and I remember it was me, but there are many cases like that, okay? So I'm not just making it up, but many cases like that. And I remember it was me, and my mother says, no, it was not you, it was your cousin. Then I doubt my memory because I trust my mother's memory more than mine, okay? So again, there is this trust in another person, especially in these cases when, you know, the other people are very certain or are in a position of authority or are considered to be more reliable because they were adults at the time. So we have this basic assumption that adults' memory is better than children's memory. And so if I remember something when I was when my early years, and my mother remembers those same years, my mother remembers those same years in a better way than me. Okay, so there are all these assumptions that are based on, you know, these naive theories that we have about memory, and also these naive theories of how to better negotiate relationships with others and our social life.
Great, thank you so much. We now have 4 questions. So I'm going to, for the next question, invite Mark to unmute and ask the question. And I'm going to encourage all of our question askers to try to be succinct so that we can hopefully fit everything into the next few minutes. So Mark, go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you very much. Look, so I mean, you know, I find the main outlines of what you're presenting and arguing entirely convincing. I'd like to make one sort of small suggestion for improvement, and then ask a question. Your slide where you had, you know, the reasons for going with belief, social influence, event implausibility, and so forth. I think what you just said to Tanya suggests that the social influence thing needs to be divided pretty clearly into the epistemic, where it's simply a matter of more evidence like the rest, like people in a position of authority and so forth, versus these other very interesting thoughts about needing to trust each other to get through the day and so forth. The question concerns Piaget's nurse and a kind of inverse of coming to disbelieve in memories. So Nietzsche says, I did this, my memory tells me. I could not have done that, my conscience tells me. Eventually, conscience wins. So it's sort of easy enough to spin a philosopher's or detective story about the Piaget case, where, yeah, the ailing nurse says, yeah, no, I was going out with my boyfriend. But then later on, we get all sorts of evidence that that was actually sort of cover up, and that she was too ashamed about her role in the abduction and so forth. So my question is sort of about the first personal thing, because at that point, you sort of just have a straightforward epistemological issue like any other question of history. How do I going to figure out what happened? So I think this is kind of supporting you, but I just wonder if you had thoughts about it.
Yeah, I understand your point, and I don't know, I haven't really thought about this point in this way, but definitely people can change their version. So you're talking about conscience, and the nurse actually retracting later her statement because actually she understands that that statement was false because it was just responding to her a sense of shame for not have been able to cope with the abduction and you know, the trauma that Piaget might have experienced, etc., etc. Well, you know, what I think is that if the nurse is convincing enough, Piaget might switch the belief again. So that's what I was saying. You know, I think that beliefs can be moved around quite easily. If there is enough convincing evidence, I don't know if it is epistemic, not non-epistemic, but if there is enough convincing evidence, then people are willing to go along with it. Okay, so I think that Piaget might have changed his mind twice if the nurse actually was changing her mind again. And the reason for, you know, making that statement when he was 40 years old was actually just out of shame. So I think that there might be flipping of beliefs. And belief, I think, is it's a very strange, because beliefs are very strong, very, you know, for some types of beliefs are really, really difficult to change. And some types of beliefs like this one are relatively easy to change. And I think that, you know, from what I understand, it's very difficult. We use the term belief just for a sort of umbrella category that actually includes very, very different elements that need to be distinguished, because why belief in occurrence can be flipped so easily, and instead, I don't know, belief in the goodness of a person is very hard to change, or the belief in the danger of scientific investigation, or the danger of vaccines, for God's sake, are impossible to change. So why? So maybe we talk about beliefs in a sort of very generic and vague way, as we do for everything, more or less. But we might need actually to distinguish more categories within the belief overarching category.
That actually ties into one. We have great questions in the chat, and we're not going to get to all of them, but let me hopefully get 2 more in. One of them relates to what you just said, and so I'll raise it. This is Emmett, who asks whether or not what you presented might have implications for what we think people are doing when they report on things other than their memories. So, for example, you just mentioned the goodness of a person. What Emmett suggested as examples here are the personality traits in questionnaires, their perceptual experiences, and so on, right? So to what extent do you think the basic story here for memory might apply more generally and have implications for those kinds of measurements?
Well, I think that what this memory story applies to is the fact that we have what I call stances. Okay, so we have, I don't know if they're called attitudes, I don't know how they're called, but like naive theoretical positions about things. Okay, and those naive theoretical positions allow us to interpret the world, interpret the relationships, interpret people, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, we get information, and this information might change or not change this naive theoretical position. I mean, you philosophers might have a much better terminology than my tentative terminology right now. But I think that this is what happens. And then I think that the other element that holds is that if the information is convincing enough, and convincing enough, by convincing us, I mean it really uses the right key for change, then also very strongly held beliefs might be changed. Maybe it might be even possible to convince people that vaccines are not that dangerous if the right key for that belief is touched and is turned.
That is an amazing thought to end on. So thank you so much. I apologize to the great questions in the chat that we did not get to. I will save the chat for you, Giuliana, and send it to you so that you can see the issues people raised.
Yeah, maybe I'd like actually to read those questions, because they might be useful for me and for my thinking.
Yes, and I will save them for you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you again to our speaker. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Our next talk will be at the end of the month, continuing in this series. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, you all, for your patience. Bye.